All right, guess what kind of interview we have for you today? Oh my God, how did you know? That's right, another fantastic interview. Today is with Michael Isikoff. He's an award-winning journalist, only worked at the Washington Post, Newsweek, NBC News, was the Chief Investigative Correspondent, and is the Chief Investigative Correspondent for Yahoo News right now. And Michael is actually probably among our top 3 most frequent guests of all time in Young Turks history, from back in the radio days when we used to talk to you all the time. Michael, it's good to see you, man.
Hey, good to
see
be
you
here
in the studio.
in person.
Right. That's right. So I want to talk to Mike about his media career, because it's a really interesting one. His recent experience at NBC News and at Newsweek. Mike was the guy who was prepared to break the Monica Lewinsky story, and then the editors at Newsweek shut it down, and then Drudge ran with it the next day. But he's the one who had the story. So that's very interesting. His experience at NBC is super interesting. But right now he's got a documentary out that I think you guys will all, I don't know about love, because it's a sad story about what the terrible discrimination that used to happen in this country, but we'll certainly find fascinating. It's called Uniquely Nasty: The U.S. Government's War on Gays.
It was a war on gays. It was an effort to silence them, to ruin their lives.
They said, we don't want you. We don't like you. You sicken us. We think you're sex deviates.
You can't get away with it.
This is the government. They're coming at me, and I had nothing.
And the FBI's around asking if I'm gay. And it really terrified people.
This is not ancient history. This is something in my life.
So I'm told now that no, everything's over. That everything is lovely, and the government never had a war against gays. Is that not true, Mike?
It's certainly true that things have changed.
That's
quite
definitely
a bit.
right. That's
and you know,
clearly
this has
true.
been a pretty momentous year, the Supreme Court decision, and I think everybody thought it was settled then, and now we have this Kentucky experience, which is interesting culturally and politically, but I mean, you know, the broad stroke sweep of history here is pretty clear.
Yeah, it's a blip in the radar.
But this documentary, which I did, is really a look back into a pretty sorry chapter in American history, recent American history, and one that very few people know. I mean, we know about the civil rights battles of the 60s and 70s and the discrimination that preceded it. We know about government abuses by the FBI and other government agencies when it comes to monitoring and surveilling dissidents in this country, or labor union leaders and civil rights leaders. But there was a whole era and concerted campaign by the United States government to harass, stigmatize, surveil gay and lesbian Americans for many decades. And there was a whole program by the FBI called the Sex Deviates program that was authorized by J. Edgar Hoover, directing FBI agents to collect the names of every gay and lesbian who worked for the federal government.
Is that
and then out them, in some cases by blind memorandum. This is all in memos written by J. Edgar Hoover, and it kind of foreshadowed the abuses, the better-known abuses that came later, COINTELPRO, in the 60s and 70s.
So talk to me about the Pervert Elimination Squad. What was that?
That was a parallel campaign by the United States Park Service to entrap gays looking for sex in public parks. Of course, in that era, it was illegal to have, their sodomy laws were still in place. There were no legal authorized gay bars you could go to, and so very often there would be liaisons in parks, and the Park Service and the Washington police launched this campaign to entrap gays. Now, probably the single most compelling story in this documentary, Uniquely Nasty, involves the blackmail of a United States senator over his son's arrest by the Washington police for soliciting sex in Lafayette Park. And we can talk about that at some length.
So let's get into that a little bit, because the idea theoretically began as, well, if somebody's gay, they could be a problem for the government, because what if they get blackmailed, right? So what if the Soviets have the goods on them and they're going to use them to get secrets, and that's the ostensible reason. Yeah. But then it somehow morphed into us blackmailing them.
Yeah.
So how did that
exactly.
happen?
Look, this was in the height of the Cold War, and at the time, if you were gay, the view was that you were a security threat because you were subject to blackmail, and you could become a Soviet communist agent because you would be terrified that if you didn't cooperate with the communists, your life would be destroyed. So in order to protect against that, that was the basis for that executive order that's shown. This was the intro to the movie, by the way, and that executive order, which was signed by Dwight Eisenhower just a couple months after he was elected, declared that sexual perversion was a security threat. If you were known to be gay, you could not get a security clearance. So anything that implicated somebody with either homosexual conduct or alleged homosexual conduct or homosexual conduct in their family would be viewed, you were...
Because Hunt wasn't gay, it was his son.
No, Hunt was not. Well, and actually his son wasn't gay either. His son was experimenting, as young people sometimes do, and got caught in this by this pervert elimination squad that was hanging out undercover in Lafayette Park. But this became, it led to really one of the more shocking episodes and consequential episodes in U.S. congressional history that almost nobody knows about. When I tell people the story, they are absolutely astonished. But what happened was Lester Hunt, the Democrat from Wyoming, was a foe of Joe McCarthy. He and Joe McCarthy tangled quite a bit in the Senate. And two of McCarthy's allies, Stiles Bridges of New Hampshire and Herman Welker of Idaho, learned about his son's arrest in Lafayette Park. And they they blackmailed Senator Hunt and said, you will resign your seat. At the time, by the way, the control of the Senate was totally up in the air. It was completely divided. Robert Taft had died, so there was a tie between Republicans and Democrats. There was an election looming. They wanted that seat. They blackmailed, threatened Senator Hunt with outing his son if he didn't resign. Senator Hunt goes to his office on a Saturday morning with a gun and kills himself. It was all covered up at the time. It was said it was for health reasons. That was the public account. But that story was known in the Capitol, and it caught the attention of a novelist, Alan Drury, who wrote a blockbuster novel of that time, Advise and Consent, on the bestseller list for over 100 weeks, won the Pulitzer Prize, and then made into a major Hollywood movie by Otto Preminger. And at the heart of the movie, a senator is blackmailed over a homosexual affair he had during the Army in World War II, goes to his office and shoots himself. The depiction of homosexuality in that movie and the threat it could do to your political career had enormous consequences. Barney Frank, in an interview in Uniquely Nasty, says this is one of the reasons he stayed in the closet for years after reading Advise and Consent. So that's what a powerful cultural impact the book and the movie had. And as I say, I didn't know, and I'm somewhat of a history buff, that it was actually based on this real story of Lester Hunt. For this movie, we found Lester Hunt's son, 86 years old, living in Chicago, interviewed him for the first time in camera, and he tells the story of the blackmail plot that led to the death of his father.
Right. So now that program began in 1951, as we just saw. How long does it run for?
Well, the really interesting thing is it goes on for years and actually expands. The premise of the Sex Deviates program and the Eisenhower Security Order was that gays were a security threat. But over time, the Civil Service Commission of the United States expanded the ban on gays and based it on what was called the suitability standard. If you were gay, you were unsuitable for federal employment. You were disruptive. Your mere presence was disruptive to the federal workforce.
Why was it disruptive? Were you interested?
You might try to solicit your fellow workers to have sex in the back. This is all spelled out, by the way, in government memos. That's the really shocking thing about this. You can read the chairman of the United States Civil Service Commission, John Macy, who actually was a Kennedy appointee and then served most of his term under Lyndon Johnson's administration, spelling out why we can't have gays working for the government. So it became an absolute ban on employment. Gays were barred from working from the federal government for decades, up until, and we trace the story of when it starts to change, in the 1970s. You start to have federal judges who give orders saying, you can't deny a person employment solely because of their sexual preference. And we tell a pretty dramatic story of somebody who was fired from the National Bureau of Standards because they discovered he was gay, and we found him. He actually got married this year in Florida to his longtime partner.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
It's a pretty moving scene to watch this wedding ceremony.
In the movie, you didn't get much into J. Edgar Hoover's personal life.
No. In part because because nobody really knows what the facts are. There's a written piece I did that goes with, if you go to our website, Uniquely Nasty, you'll see a written piece I did that goes into this subject. But he had a intimate spousal, if you will, relationship with his longtime deputy, Clyde Tolson. They ate lunch together, they ate dinner together, they vacationed together. They're buried in adjoining plots in Congressional Cemetery in Washington. And if you look at some of the photographs of the two of them together, they are certainly suggestive. Now, beyond that, we know what they did behind closed doors, and did they share bedrooms? We just don't know. And there's
maybe they were super, super good friends.
Well, they certainly were super, super good friends. That's not maybe. It's just a question. We don't know what it went beyond that.
And look, sometimes people are driven by their own demons and by they go out of their way to say, I'm not one of them.
Right.
We got to go get them.
Well,
right?
there certainly was a lot of that going on because Hoover was the sort of architect of this this harassment and of gays. I just want to say a word about how it is we came to know all this, and I came to know of it, and that's the central character in the movie, a guy, really fascinating guy named Charles Francis, who was the gay friend of George W. Bush.
That's
of
exactly
all
what I
people.
wanted to ask you about next.
Yeah.
So because this is not about ancient history. So yeah, it goes into the 1970s.
That was his voice you hear at the end of that teaser saying, this is not ancient history, this is something that happened in my lifetime.
That's right. So and so what's interesting is we find out that George W. Bush was actually open to the gay community, gay Republicans, including him.
Right.
And I remember those times, right?
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, oh, this is part of his compassionate conservative shtick, et cetera. But then in 2004, he goes back to, no, let's run smear campaigns and run elections based on, ballot measures against gay rights.
Right.
So what happened there? I mean, I know that 2004 is a political calculus. I'm not naive about that. But did George Bush mean it in 2000? Why was it helpful in 2000 for him to be pro-gay Republicans?
At the time,
what switched between those two things?
Just to give a little context to this, I mean, Charles Francis actually, longtime friend of the Bush family. His brother was served in Bush's gubernatorial cabinet in Texas, and then was head of the Pioneers, the wealthy bundlers during the 2000 campaign. So he had a long-time connection. Charles Francis did to Bush and the Bush family. Comes out to him on the eve of the 2000 campaign. Offers to help, works with Karl Rove. At the time, remember, Bush was campaigning as a compassionate conservative. He was trying to distance himself from the extreme right-wing base of the Republican Party and show that he had a broader appeal. And Charles Francis became his guy, his emissary to the gay community, set up these meetings with Bush and gays, and worked with Rove. There are emails between Charles Francis and Karl Rove that are just fascinating to read, and then works to get gay appointees in the early days of the Bush White House in 2001, but runs up against the harsh political realities of 2004. The Iraq War has gone south. There's the disclosures about the Bush failing to act on warnings about 9/11. 2004 was looking like a really tough race. And what do? They go to the base. And what's moving the base at the time? Same-sex marriage. The Massachusetts Supreme Court had made the ruling, gay marriage is coming to you. Bush comes out for a constitutional amendment to define marriage. Was his heart really in it? There are a lot of people who were close to Bush who say it wasn't. It was just something that he had to do. But for Charles Francis, it didn't make a difference. He talks in the movie how watching that unfold in the 2004 campaign totally disillusioned him about Bush and the Republican Party. We were thrown overboard, he says, in Uniquely Nasty. He broke with Bush, refused White House invitations after that, and threw himself into this mission to uncover the concealed, unknown history of the government's persecution of gays. And two other things I just want to mention. George Takei of Star Trek fame is the voice of J. Edgar Hoover in Uniquely Nasty. You can listen to him. And Matt Bomer.
Hard to miss that voice.
Right. Matt Bomer reads a Civil Service Commission memo that gives the documentary its name, Uniquely Nasty, talking about how most Americans view homosexuality as something uniquely nasty. And you can hear that. We got a whole bunch of really interesting screenings coming up. The National Press Club is doing one in October. The National Archives is going to show Uniquely Nasty. There's going to be a showing at the Justice Department. And the Smithsonian's Museum of American History has just selected it for a history film forum that they'll be putting on in November 21st.
Yeah, and so final thing is I want to connect it back to today. Because it's not just, okay, so Bush, I think the fact that he was probably not anti-gay. I mean, that seems to be all indication. Yeah. But took those anti-gay actions anyway, I think it actually speaks even more poorly of him. It's one thing to be ignorant and say, "Oh, my religion taught me this, and my preacher tells me every day, and I don't hate them. I'm told that it's the wrong thing to do." And there's a lot of people in the country that way. I don't think that it certainly looks like it's out of malice, and that's how I perceive it as a progressive, oftentimes. But I get that they're taught that, and they're brainwashed with that to some degree. The fact that Bush was not brainwashed to that, he had gay friends, he reached out to the gay community, and then betrayed them, full well knowing, it's for my political benefit, I would argue is worse. Then Ken Cuccinelli recently ran for governor of Virginia, still saying we should outlaw sodomy.
Right.
That's today. That's unbelievable. Yeah. And how many of the Republican candidates now are in favor of gay marriage? Is it zero?
Well, it hasn't. John Kasich certainly seems to be supportive. Mm-hmm. He's a pretty serious Republican.
We found one.
Candidate. Okay. I think Trump is probably not too
probably doesn't care.
Doesn't care certainly. So look, are there still some ideologues out there? But I think the political winds have shifted.
It has shifted, and I think actually a lot of it is the donor base too. So now even some of the ideologues, the right-wingers, which is 15 out of the 17 people running on the Republican side, will talk out of both sides of their mouth.
Right.
No, I don't want to discriminate against gay people because some of the top hedge fund guys giving money to the Republicans.
Paul Singer, who's probably one of the biggest donors to Republican candidates, a billionaire hedge fund guy from New York, actually financed the challenge in California to same-sex marriage and sort of helped set in motion the path that led to the Supreme Court. He hired, it was Ted Olson and David Boies who were basically being funded by Paul Singer. And he's, a hardcore neoconservative, has very strong feelings on national security issues and is a major donor to the Republican Party.
Yeah, and has...
and his son was gay, by the way. That's how he got into this.
That's right.
Right.
And there are some guys who are gay themselves, and in Singer's case, his son happens to be gay, and when it's in your own family, all of a sudden a guy who has a lot of suspect opinions on other issues, all of a sudden is very open to that community, and all of a sudden when you have a billionaire Republican donor, makes some difference in the Republican Party, at least in some of the language that they speak. Now, I want to get back into the Republican race in a second, but I want to talk to you about media overall. So you've now done the whole spectrum, Washington Post, Newsweek, NBC News, now Yahoo News. So let's talk about some of the differences. First, even though you've been on the show a million times, we never went back and discussed the Monica Lewinsky story. So I just want to hit on that for a second because I want to talk about general themes as to what's allowed in the press and what's not. So what was the excuse your editors gave to spike that story?
They were nervous.
It was just like, hey, Mike, it's a great story. You got him, but we're nervous.
No, look, I've actually, I wrote a lot about this at the time, but I mean, that was to actually be the first to publish that the president was being investigated for a relationship with a former White House intern was such a big deal at the time that it kind of spooked them, and they wanted to be super extra careful and wanted more work done to confirm various aspects of it, even though by any standard I had it totally nailed at the time. What was the although I knew about the relationship between Clinton and Lewinsky for some time, what was driving it at that point was that Ken Starr had launched a criminal investigation, had gone to the Justice Department, got an expanded mandate so he could investigate this, and had done a sting at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in which he tried to get Monica Lewinsky on tape talking to Linda Tripp, who at that point was a informant for Starr, to acknowledge the relationship and that the president had been pressuring her to lie in the Paula Jones case. That was what was, and what we knew for a fact was that Starr had done all these things. I had confirmed the Starr investigation. I had confirmed the expanded Justice Department mandate. We had multiple sources. You know.
So what happened in the press between Watergate and that story, where from press is hungry, going after the government, they're watchdogs, they're trying to figure things out, to let's be a little careful. It's the government. We're spooked.
Yeah, I mean, look. I mean, there's certainly an element of that, and that you know, I think the press is often not as aggressive as it should be, and doesn't challenge as much as it should. And there's plenty of punches that are pulled to some degree, lesser or mostly lesser, but sometimes bigger, when the government comes and says there's national security reasons for not publishing something, or you know, gives an explanation. But that's, you know, there is that broad trend. In this, you know, you throw in the extra element of sex, and you know, it does make people nervous. So I'm not, you know, I don't necessarily put it all into the same ballpark.
I hear you on that. But then, you know, look, you broke a lot of stories during the Bush administration. You know, some that people think stands out is the story about what they did to the Koran at Guantanamo Bay. But it was a lot more than that, right? But a lot of people didn't break stories during the Bush administration,
right?
And they count out. And so, you know, we had Sam Donaldson on the show a long time ago, and he said back in the day, Roone Arledge would give him a raise every time the Reagan administration complained about him. Yeah. And then later, when the Clinton administration complained about him on his second tour duty as the White House correspondent for ABC News, he'd still get a raise, right? Yeah. But today, it feels like it's the opposite. That if you risk your sources...
certainly not my experience at NBC News.
So tell me about that.
No, I'm just saying that there was not, to some degree, the networks certainly have evolved from that sort of more adversarial view to we want the big get. We want to be able to get the president or a cabinet member for our Sunday show, or you know, we want to be on good terms with the White House, and I think that's been true. It was certainly true during the George W. Bush era, and it's been true during the Barack Obama era.
Yeah, and so it certainly seems that way from the outside. It's interesting to hear it from the inside. So at NBC News, was there stories you wanted to do that they were like, let's hold off on that?
Yeah. I mean, you know, the most conspicuous example is I had the exclusively the government memo justifying drone strikes against American citizens. Remember, this is in the aftermath of the killing of Alaki, and you know, a lot of people were extremely troubled by the idea that the executive branch could order the execution of an American citizen without any due process or trial or even challenge whatsoever. Just summarily decide, you know, take them out.
I was one of those troubled, deeply troubled.
And I had the memo that the Justice Department wrote justifying it, why the president can do this. And it had all sorts of interesting legal arguments that we'd never seen before, including, you know, the essential defense was, the essential argument was self-defense. If we have intelligence that somebody is about posing an imminent threat to American lives, the president must take action. Right, and it turned out when you read the memo that there was quite an elastic definition of the word imminent. I mean, it doesn't mean they had real-time intelligence about any threat. If you had intelligence from the past that this person had once threatened, that could be construed as an imminent threat. So there was, anyway, quite a bit in this memo. And I was working for the time as a correspondent for NBC News. I tried to pitch the premier broadcast, the NBC Nightly News, on the reporting on this, and they turned it down.
Did they say why?
You never got explanations for these things. They didn't have time on the show. It's the visuals weren't there. Anyway, so I broke it on the Rachel Maddow show that night, and then the next night, by that time, it had caused quite a big furor, and then it led the nightly news, the next night after it became a political issue.
In some ways, that's good news. At least you were allowed to break it on Rachel's show.
Yeah, that's true.
Because oftentimes the MSNBC anchors get heat for not having much criticism of this administration.
Right.
And I know because I was there, and I remember they would tell me, "Hey, we're all on the same team here." That's the kind of language they would use.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm not on the Democratic Party team. I don't know what team you're on, but I'm not on that team.
Yeah.
And I remember one time I was going to say on air, no, I did say, I said, now let me keep it real with you about what the president actually said after he spoke about Egypt and Mubarak right in the beginning of the rebellion. And producer came back in my ear right away and said, don't do it. Okay, so that was very clear.
Yeah, yeah. Every story is different, and there's a different calculus. And I mean, I certainly hear you, and I don't think. Well, this just goes to my sort of point. Look, too much of TV, as you know, is about ratings and numbers, and if a story doesn't seem like it's going to get good numbers, or there isn't going to be interest. It is a commercial business.
So you think that that's a large part of it? I mean, so they think if I interview President Obama, I'm going to get big ratings for that because he's a big star, right? So if you break your annoying story about how he's executing U.S. citizens without due process, I'm less likely to get the president. Not that many people are going to watch that story. It's a bummer, right? And so and then you'll cost me my ratings when I could get the president on later.
You're putting it in a way that's probably a little starker than it actually is. These things are often more subtle.
No, they're much more subtle. But actually, I'm being kind to them because I actually think that's some part of the equation, but certainly not the whole equation. I also think the fact that if things filter down. So if Comcast needs mergers approved, they don't want to piss off the government. There's billions of dollars at stake there. Right. So the guy at Comcast isn't going to pull Brian Williams aside and say, hey, Brian, don't do the story against the Obama administration. It's going to be super subtle. Right. He's going to talk to the guy who's head of NBC News, who's going to talk to the guy who's the head of the news, nightly news, who are all going to have subtle conversations, right? Yeah. And I've been there and I've had those subtle conversations, but at the end of the day, all of a sudden you have a neutered press, especially on TV, right? That doesn't really have an interest. Am I right in saying that TV is worse than print journalism and than other parts of the media?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think, look, there is still excellent journalism in Washington. The New York Times, makes its share of mistakes, but it also does a pretty serious job of holding the president and members of Congress and the administration accountable on a lot of issues. I'm regularly impressed with what some of my colleagues who I've known for years have do in this area, and the Washington Post has done. I mean, there's still a lot of good journalism out there. The media has become so fractured these days that if it doesn't, we all tend to consume the media that makes us feel better about our prejudices, right, and conforms our prejudices. So if there's a story out there that conflicts with your prejudices, you may not even see it, or you'll see a very skewed version of it, right? So I think that's the more serious issue today, is how the fragmentation of the media has made it hard for people to get a handle on,
Well, on that I agree and disagree a little bit. So the part I agree with is I hear you. So we know that if you like certain things on Facebook, Facebook is going to serve that to you. If you are a conservative, you watch Fox News, they're going to reinforce that. Now, I like to think we don't do that, and I have good evidence to that effect, because when I started speaking out against the Obama administration and the abuses, including the extrajudicial killings and the drone strikes, we lost a lot of members. A lot of people who subscribed to our show said, "How dare you? What are you doing?" and stuff. So that does normally happen. There are some of us who don't do that, and we try our best to be fair and honest with our coverage. You know, I've always said I'm a progressive, but I don't care about the Democratic Party at all. And if they're not progressive, I have no interest in them, right? And so, yeah, that's an issue. But the part that I think is a bigger problem, and hence I guess my disagreement a little bit with you is that look, I think it's an overall trend in the media that is not just about your Facebook likes, and that right now we minimize things that would have been giant scandals in the past. We maximize things that are nonsense, made up, fake scandals, right? And the media gets led around by the nose by certain agendas. So, I mean, the story you uncovered, in one of the memos, Eric Holder writes, due process is not necessarily a judicial process. That's outrageous. That's Nixonian. That's when the president does it, it's by definition legal.
Can if I get just, it's the political culture. What gives a story legs? What is when there's an adversarial party on the other end? We're going to pick up on it. Right? During Watergate, you had a Democratic Congress that was, and you know, in addition to a judicial system that was going to hold hearings and get to the bottom of what was a real scandal in the government. We had that during Iran-Contra. We had it just to a degree that makes some people, you know, a lot of people thought was excessive, but we certainly had it during the Clinton administration and the investigations of the Clinton administration, some of which, by the way, such as the campaign finance abuses, I thought were real and serious and needed to be investigated. We don't have that today. You know, on the issues that you're talking about, the Republican Congress isn't interested in investigating Obama for extrajudicial killings of suspected terrorists. They're not, you know, demanding more for the transparency that he promised in the drone program. You know, these are not issues that, you know, cause a political reaction in Washington, and that's what drives stories. That's what gives them momentum.
So that's a great and interesting point. So let's flesh that out a little bit. So whenever Democrats agree with Republicans, which happens actually a lot, people don't talk about it, but the extrajudicial killings, the tax cuts, you know, people don't talk about it. Obama made Bush's tax cuts permanent for 94% of the revenue affected, right? So that's that Bush couldn't do that, right? That people give him credit for taking away 6%, right? But no, he made 94% permanent. So, but you're never going to have a controversy about that because the Republicans are going to go, okay, oh yeah, you raise taxes, but I'm going to let it go, right? Yeah. So whenever we have a conservative position, Obama pushes it, Republicans push it. There's no controversy. Everybody just keeps going along. If there's anything that is either a progressive position or just scandals that are made up. So let's use the IRS scandal, okay? So the IRS, it turns out, investigated liberal groups as much as they investigated conservative groups. It turns out actually they took one actual action against a liberal group, none against conservatives. And you find out it's nothing. It's made out of thin air, okay? And there's an agenda behind that. The Republicans want to make sure that their donors are allowed to cheat on their taxes as much as possible. So they want to rob the IRS of its resources, and they want to be able to have those donors give into their campaigns and not have the IRS look into it. So they want to say, IRS, scandal, 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 IRS. Well, the other guys, Obama in this case, opposes them and says, no, that's ridiculous. That's just not true, right? Okay, we have controversy. So now that sucks up all the oxygen in the room for how many months? You know, how many years? So how do you deal with this uneven playing field where the truth gets buried by its nature and the nonsense gets promoted by its nature?
Well, I mean, look, I think that you look at each one of these things and, you examine the facts, and I think ultimately the degree to which some of these things have been overblown becomes clearer. And I don't hear many people talking about the IRS thing right now.
They did their damage. They got their advertising.
And also, but look, I mean...
And by the way, the IRS officially said, we're not investigating anybody that's giving political campaign money now. It's an unbelievable unilateral surrender.
To a degree, that to me is the real scandal. I thought that the abuse of 501c4s, supposedly social welfare organizations, and that's why you get the tax exemption, and then being abused, for purely political purposes. I always thought was the real scandal here. And by the way, it happens on both sides. And
absolutely.
Obama, after criticizing this, had his own Organizing for Action, which was a 501c4.
Obama's been a near
set up
disaster
as a social welfare organization that was essentially just promoting his political agenda. That's what it was created for. It was the remnants of his campaign that was being used for political purposes and as a run-up into the 2014 elections. The fact that the IRS has not been more aggressive monitoring these groups on both sides is what I thought is, as I said, was the real scandal, and they should be. And but Lois Lerner and those people were clumsy about the way they did it, asking for word searches of Tea Party as a grounds for who you were going to target. That was wrong. They shouldn't have done it. So there was something that led to it.
The whole point of the fake scandal was to cover up the real scandal. Okay, and it worked, because of exactly what you outlined, which is if you have a controversy, it's going to suck up all the oxygen in the room, right? And so all you have to do, right or wrong, is create a controversy, which then leads us perfectly into Donald Trump.
Okay, I was wondering when we get to Donald Trump, right?
So, I mean, here's a guy who's figured it out. He's like, the press loves controversy, so let me serve it up to them. Okay, Mexicans are criminals or rapists. Okay, hey, everybody look at me.
Look, the guy's a showman, and I got to say, watching him in the campaign, he's a pretty brilliant showman.
He is. That's the one thing he knows how to do right.
The way he's been able to go from, outrageous comment to outrageous comment and keep the press attention on him, and project this idea of a guy who just says whatever's on his mind, which he certainly does.
But that doesn't mean that he's honest about whatever is in his mind. That's a different equation.
No. I mean, look, I did work on Donald Trump back in 2011 when he was thinking about running in 2012, and there were all sorts of questions about this. He was talking about running because he was such a fantastic businessman. In fact, he's presided over multiple bankruptcies of his companies in Atlantic City. He's been mired in lawsuits for condos that were never built and towers that were never built. And so there's a lot of questions about his business record per se. But, he projects the idea of I'm this fantastically successful billionaire who's never done anything wrong. And
we just covered an analysis that others did about if he'd just taken the $40 million he inherited back in 1974 and put it in an index fund, go along with the stock market, he would have done better than he did. He's done so far. So he's not fantastic. He's at best average. Okay. So, but he is a brilliant marketer. But to be fair to Donald Trump, which is a funny beginning of a sentence, he is exposing the corruption in the system. So he had a fight with Club for Growth that I covered on the show today, right? Where Club for Growth was asking for $1 million from him because that's what they do. They go around, they go to rich people, they say, give us money, and we'll bribe the politicians, and then you'll get your tax cuts. You give us $1 million, we'll get you 10 million, 100 million in tax cuts, right? We'll create IRS scandals so they don't investigate you, whatever it is, right? That's how this game is played. And Trump, just because he can't help himself, is like, oh, I have the letter. They sent me a letter. Here it is, right? Asking for the $1 million.
Cool.
This is how the scam works, right? Yeah. And so all of a sudden people go, okay, successful businessman. It's marketing, but that's okay. Like, so that's part of what builds him up. He sucks up all the oxygen in the room. And then the third thing is they go, oh, he's not corrupt like the other guys. He's exposing the corruption. Right. And he's angry, and I'm angry. Yeah. Right? And he's not Washington, and I hate Washington. Right. So then I ask you, can he win?
I never would have thought he could win in the past, and now I don't know. I don't have a clue. I mean, he has said multiple things that I would have thought would have sunk his campaign. And it not only did it not sink it, he just seems to get higher and higher in the polls. I got to believe that, this is going to fade at some point, and there's going to be more scrutiny, if nothing else, on what exactly are his policy positions. Because, I mean, as far as I can tell, he really didn't have any. He just, Mike, I'm going to hire the best people. We're going to be the most brilliant job, and we're going to fix the problem. Yeah, okay. I mean, at some point, I think,
do you think Republican voters care about policy, though? I mean, how? You think
of course
so?
They do. Of course they do. They may not be your policies, but they do care about policies.
I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. Yeah. So the Republican Party has done nothing but drive up deficits every time they're in power. And then they do the marketing, and they go, okay, we're against deficits. So the Republican voters don't care. They're like, all right, let's elect another Republican, and he'll drive up the deficit even higher.
They're against taxes. They're against the growth of government. That's what they care about the most.
So, but then, no.
There used to be a time when Republicans cared about deficits, but I think that ended during the Reagan
back when I was a Republican. Well, okay, but they haven't in a long, long time. And so it's all marketing. They say, oh, we're for small government, except we want to get between you and your doctor. Except we want to get into your personal life.
There are plenty of contradictions on both sides.
No. If you're talking about Democrats and Republicans and they're both guilty of taking the donor money, you're absolutely right. Okay. If you're talking about progressive contradictions versus conservative contradictions, it's not a close contest. Yeah. They have 1,000 times more contradictions. The whole party's built on a long con. Anyway, speaking of which, let's go to criticism of a Democrat here, Hillary Clinton. Yeah. So you and I had a conversation a while back about the email scandal, whether it was real. In the beginning, I was skeptical. I'm like, here we go again.
What did I say?
Trivial matter. You said it was real, and I think that you have been proven to be largely correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So I wasn't worried about, she wanted to hide some emails because Fox News is a pain in the ass. I get it. I might have done the same thing, right? You want every email out there. But then when you find out, wait a minute, she might have been hiding the emails about the donations going to the Clinton Foundation. Okay, now that's real, right? And now people, New York Times broke a story today about how 2 of the emails definitely had top secret material. So that's very serious. But then I view that as like, oops, that was an error. I don't think she meant to share top secret stuff. There's nothing, I wouldn't view that as nefarious. Although it's a serious violation.
Look, it's the classified stuff that's got the inspectors general and the intelligence community going. But the real scandal here was the fact that she created this private server to begin with. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was totally, outside the accepted rules and norms of the game. You don't use, you don't conduct official business on private emails. I mean, you talk to anybody who's worked for the government, Republican or Democrat, in recent years, and everybody kind of knows that. And there are reasons for it. If you're a senior position like the Secretary of State, there are genuine security issues. I mean, if you are conducting high-level, sensitive government business on a private server, what kind of security is on that server, what kind of steps have been taken to protect it. That's a totally legitimate issue, and the State Department security branch had no idea she was using a private server. To me, the more offensive and serious part of this is it protects her communications from scrutiny by Congress and by the public. The Freedom of Information Act. That's a real law. Mm-hmm. And there's an entire office in the State Department whose job it is to process freedom of information requests from historians, from adversary groups, from human rights groups, from all sorts of entities, as well as the press. And they were sending these notices to the Secretary of State's office saying, we have a FOIA here for all documents, including emails relating to X, Y, and Z. And then they would get these responses. We have no responsive documents from the Secretary. Because they had no idea that these totally legal requests for information were completely thwarted by a concealed private server in the basement of her home in Chappaqua, New York.
So let's talk about this.
So, I mean, that's to me, that's real.
So her statement that she didn't know that she wasn't supposed to put it on a private server is preposterous.
Of course not. Of course it is. And by the way, the rule they keep citing, they say, first of all, now we know it would have been clearly illegal to do what she did because the law was made crystal clear. But what the regulation that they cite actually says is the federal agencies may allow employees to use private emails for official business, provided there is a system in place for retaining those emails and providing them to the government agency.
Instead of just deleting 30,000 of them?
Yeah. Question number one, who allowed her to do this?
Mm-hmm.
Is there some memo where this was submitted to the legal office, to the security office, to any office in state saying this is what I want to do? Is this allowed? Or did she just allow it herself? She allowed herself to do and apparently didn't tell anybody. So that's number one. And second, there was no system in place, to retain the records. They were all being kept in the private server. It's only
Which she then deleted.
It's only when the Congress, the Benghazi Committee, found out about it and then asked for these emails that she turns them over to the State Department. And her argument that, they were all being captured by state because she was emailing with other state.gov people, we now know to be false. Huma Abedin had a private email account. Cheryl Mills had a private email account. The people she was emailing with had private email accounts as well. So her records weren't being captured.
So I agree with you all that. I think I'm slightly conflicted, though, because what the Republicans do to the Clintons, they do it to all the Democrats. Unbelievably, Obama has survived it, which is near miraculous. Is I'm going to make up a scandal, and then I'm going to investigate it until I turn over every single rock in your life and I find something, right? So we found out later the whole Whitewater stuff was nonsense. It turned out to be much ado about nothing, right? Benghazi, nonsense. Well, and then they start the investigation, and they bring in a guy like Ken Starr, and they bring in these guys, and then has somebody screwed up something in their lives? Of course they have. If they did an investigation of my life and your life, and they turned over every rock, they'd find some things, right? So that's why I'm like, you're right on all that stuff, and you should be outraged at that. She shouldn't have done it, and I don't believe her, right? And I'm most concerned about the possible corruption. But on the other hand, you're allowing the systematic targeting of this person to work. So I don't know how you resolve that.
Look, at this point, this is a real political problem. When as much as 60% of the public doesn't believe you're honest and trustworthy, that's a serious problem. That's I think has spooked a lot of Democratic donors. That's why you have the talk about a possible Joe Biden candidacy. And as we learned last week, these investigations can take twists and turns that you don't anticipate. I reported last week that the former aide who maintained the server in the basement of the home in Chappaqua not only invoked the Fifth Amendment to the Benghazi Committee, which could arguably have been because you think it's a political circus and they're just using it for political purposes and you don't want to expose yourself to that, so you do that. But he also invoked the Fifth with the FBI and refused to cooperate in the FBI investigation.
Oh, they're going to throw somebody under a bus. So maybe it's him.
So that does have to raise questions.
It does.
For
so
anybody looking at this. So
and again, it goes to the uneven playing field.
And we only learned that last week.
Right.
That the guy maintaining the server was taking the fifth.
Right. So the Democrats don't get to do crazy investigations. If they do, they get screamed down like, how dare you ask Bush and Cheney about torture and warrantless wiretapping, and we won't allow any of that. So you never get to look under Cheney's rocks and Bush's rocks. But you look under every Clinton rock and you find something, lo and behold. So it's an uneven playing field, but it is what it is. Do you think it's so what's the ramification here? Is it
I don't know.
Is it a disqualifier? What is it?
Well, you should be pleased. I assume you're supporting Bernie Sanders, and you must. This is good for Bernie.
I'm not a big fan of Hillary Clinton.
Okay, all right. So look, we're at a point where I don't think anybody thought we were going to be. I think it's as unexpected as Trump's rise has been Hillary's fall, and how far it goes, I don't know. Look, at the end of the day, Bernie Sanders, an atheist socialist, is not going to get elected president of the United States. That's my gut. I'm sorry.
Well,
I don't think I'm out there on that. I just think it's.
Well, crazier things have happened.
Crazier things have happened.
Like just now with Donald Trump. So you never know.
Right. Look,
and by the way, he hasn't ever said he's an atheist. I would assume it too.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Well, then I take the atheist part back. He certainly has said he's a socialist. Look, can he get the Democratic nomination? He has to. Does he have support from minorities, from African Americans and Hispanics? Does he play there? That's an important part of the Democratic constituency, and I just don't know that his appeal transcends there. And is Joe Biden going to get in? It's
whether
clear.
He gets in
and does he have, can he prevail? So I don't know. So then, you have to say the odds, as weak as Hillary looks at the moment, the odds are probably still in her favor. Now, can she win a general election? Who's the Republican nominee going to be? Is it going to be Trump? Is it going to be Jeb Bush? Is it going to be Marco Rubio? I think, Rubio and Kasich, that would be a really strong ticket. You could go either way. Kasich, Rubio, Ohio and Florida. That, it would be a pretty powerful ticket. I don't know that the Republicans are smart enough to go in that direction, but we'll see.
Would you want or would you not want Bernie Sanders versus Donald Trump general election?
Well, from pure entertainment point of view as a journalist, yeah, I'd love it. It would be great. That would be.
There's a lot of merit in that.
I'd put my money on Trump, by the way, in that. But it could be.
But a lot of people put their money against Bernie Sanders, and we'll find out soon if they were right or not.
Yeah.
So
look, I think he certainly looks great in New Hampshire right now, and it is the neighboring state.
Three polls in a row, he's up by 9 points. And in Iowa, he's now catching up.
He's gaining, but then you got to look beyond that, and what happens after that.
But the thing is, after you win Iowa and New Hampshire, it becomes a whole different ballgame, right? Then he's not winning in South Carolina now, but Obama wasn't winning in all those states either before he won Iowa.
John McCain won New Hampshire, and Hillary Clinton won New Hampshire.
Right. No, Hillary Clinton winning New Hampshire wasn't the same because she was supposed to win, and Obama had the momentum with the win in Iowa.
Yeah.
McCain is very similar, and so what happened? Maybe. Right. I don't know why we let South Carolina decide our elections.
Well, I don't think that was the firewall. There will be a firewall in the South, and we'll see. Look, we'll see. We're still got how many? 4 months to go before these happen. 4 months ago, I don't think anybody would have thought we're having the conversation we're having now.
That's for sure. That's right. Not even me. And I like to pretend that I'm really good at prognostication. All right, Michael Isikoff, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everybody check out Uniquely Nasty and check out Mike's work at Yahoo because he's breaking stories all the time. One of the great reporters in the country. Thank you.